Now we're going to build upon what we've already learned about the box model. By carefully considering how we structure our XHTML, and by using the position property in CSS, we will see that we can move our elements around the page, in addition to changing their appearance. Let's see how this is done. In this lesson, we will begin to use div tags and IDs in CSS to control the layout of our pages. We've touched upon this subject a little bit before. Let's quickly review what we've done and use that as a starting point for moving forward. In the Project Files folder, in the Chapter 8 section, I'm going to open lesson_01_home.htm and lesson_01_home.css in my HTML editor, which in this case is TextEdit, or perhaps Notepad on the PC. I'm going to open these files by dragging them onto the TextEdit icon on my desktop, one at a time. And I'm also going to open my HTML file in my web browser, which in this case is Firefox on the Macintosh, and we'll see a web page that looks very similar to the files we've been working on up until now. If I switch back over to TextEdit, I'll arrange my window so that it's a little easier to navigate between the files, and I'll scroll down so that I'm looking at the beginning of the body element of my HTML file. Previously, we've used div tags in combination with an ID attribute to get some simple formatting on our page. If I switch back over to our web browser, we can see that we have essentially a black background with a banner graphic at the top, and a white box contained within is all of the content for our page. That white box on our screen, which encompasses our content, is created by our div tag with an ID attribute referencing our CSS rules, which are in the main content ID. If I bring my CSS file up and scroll down, I can find a section dedicated to layout formatting, and I know that quickly because we took the time to comment our code so that we could quickly open up a document and jump right to a part of the file that we're interested in, just like we did right now. And I can see that main content ID defined in my CSS file, and I know that this main content reference isn't a class but is an ID because of the use of the pound or hash symbol before the words main content. Now what we would like to do in this lesson and in future lessons throughout this chapter is begin to change the way that our page is laid out. Up till now we've been looking mainly at formatting. We haven't been looking at positioning. One of the things that I've talked about in our previous lessons was separating structure from layout and formatting. Layout and formatting being controlled in our style sheets with an HTML structure referencing that layout and formatting information. What I want to do now is I want to introduce another element into our HTML file so that we would have on our page not just a single white space containing all of the content, but a secondary column positioned to the right of our main content column. If I switch back over to our web browser, we can see our page has no right-hand side column. I want to bring a right-hand side column in right next to this white space. Well, to do that, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to define a CSS rule that will govern the attributes of that element, and then I'll create a div element which refers to that rule. So I'll switch back over to our CSS file, and immediately underneath the main content rule, I'm going to create another rule. I'll add a few more returns here on my screen to create a little bit more space, and I'm going to decide to name this side space side content, and I'm only choosing that name because we're using main content as the name for where the main body of our page will be contained. So it seems reasonable to me that we might name our side column side content. You can name it anything you like. As long as it makes sense to you, any name that you like is perfectly fine. But try to give logical names and consistent names to your CSS rules. You'll help yourself and anybody else that you work with by doing so. Now I'm going to specify a few properties for this new side content ID so that my side content ID will have a smaller width than my main content ID, which right now is filling the screen, and I'm going to give it a different background color, a bit of a shade of beige, and I'll add a little bit of padding to it. So to do so, we'll use the properties that you've seen before, such as background color, and in Photoshop I looked up a shade of beige for which the hexadecimal value is FC, FC, F5, and I'll assign a width to this div of 200 pixels and a padding of 5 pixels. Now from the File menu, I'll save my CSS file and switch over to my HTML file. And we saw in our web browser that the main content of our page is encased inside that white box, and that white box is defined by this div element, which I'm highlighting in blue, in our HTML file, which I can see ends immediately before the closing body tag, main content div, spanning almost the entire length of our HTML file. I want to know where that div tag ends, because I don't want to create my div tag with the side content ID reference within that div tag. I want to make sure that that div is completely separate from my main content div. So after my main content div, I'll type another div tag and close it as soon as I create it. And then within the opening div tag of this new div element, I'll create an ID attribute, and I'll assign the value to that ID attribute of side content. Now I'm also going to populate a little bit of copy inside this side content div, just so that I can see something on the screen, until I have copy that I actually want to put into that space. So for right now, I'll create a new paragraph element. And within that paragraph element, which I'll put on 2 separate lines to make it a little easier to see, I'll add a little bit of placeholder text, which graphic designers often do, such as lorem ipsum dolor et al. And now I will save my HTML file from the File menu, or hit Command S, Control S on the PC, switch over to my web browser, and hit the Reload button. Now, immediately after my main content div, I see what will become my side-positioned side content div, which has a little bit of padding inside it, which you can see immediately to the left of the L in lorem, which we don't see in our main content div. And I can see that unlike our main content div, this div tag has a fixed width of 200 pixels.